Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is episode 16, The Myth of the Industry Standard. I think you're going to like today's episode. Before I get into today's episode, well, I guess first I should let you know, are you in the right place? If you're a playback tech, musician, music director, anyone performing on stage with Ableton Live, welcome. You're home. This is the place to be. If you're not doing that quite yet, but you aspire to do that, want to do that, then this is the right podcast for you. So before I get into today's episode, I just want to take like 30 seconds just to say thank you. I really consider it such a blessing, such a privilege to be able to create content for humans to consume on the internet, whether it's this podcast, tutorials. If you're from Studio Stage student and you've signed up at the site and you're taking courses, you're joining me for monthly calls, downloading content, thank you. Again, I know I should get into the content. I shouldn't make the intro super long, but I just want to say thank you. It really means a lot. The kind words you leave, comments that you guys leave means a lot. It's great to meet some of you in person when I'm doing events. I just did an Ableton event a couple weeks ago. That was so much fun. In fact, we talked about this podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast because of that event, say hey in the comments. But I just want to say thank you. If you're listening, even if this is your first time listening, thank you. It means a lot. It's literally the way I provide for my family. It's a way I can afford to get food and eat food. And thankfully, you can only see me from here up, but I eat a lot of food. So thank you. All right, let's get into the myth of the industry standard. I don't know if you've heard this before. In fact, you probably have if you're listening to this podcast. But if you're going to get into music production, you got to learn Pro Tools, right? If you're going to edit video, you've got to learn Adobe Premiere. There's this idea of the industry standard. What does the industry standard mean? It means the standard, the thing that the industry typically does, the software that the industry typically uses. And that's a true thing. I mean, it's a valid thing that's real. You look at what is everyone in the industry using, what are most people in the industry using, and that kind of becomes the industry standard. There's certain practices, right, that become the industry standard. The industry standard is to run this amount of outputs from Ableton. The industry standard is to use Ableton for tracks, whatever it is. There's this idea of the industry standard. It's a real thing. Despite the title of this week's episode, the industry standard is not a myth, but here's where I hope to encourage you today. Here's where I hope to kind of to challenge you a bit is I heard growing up and when I started getting into this that, hey, if you were going to do music production, you got to know Pro Tools. If you are going to do production, actually, I heard if you're going to do recording, you got to know Pro Tools. If you're going to do production, you got to know Logic, right? That's what the people use. That's what producers use. Well, I have three things I want to share with you guys. Today's going to be a pretty short episode. Of course, I always say that and it becomes a long episode, but I think it's going to be a pretty short episode. But I have some encouragement to you guys that I want to share that I think kind of breaks this. I think the industry standard is a myth. Yes, it's a real thing, but it's a myth in the sense of it's not something you need to follow. Here's point number one. The industry standard only matters if you are in the industry. What I mean by that is if you seek to become a recording engineer, yes, it is a valid statement that you need to know Pro Tools, right? That is a very valid thing. If you are a songwriter, though, if you are a singer-songwriter who is writing your own songs, that is writing your own songs maybe to sell them, but even just writing your own songs as a way to express your creative ideas, maybe it's not professional, maybe it's a part-time thing, maybe it's for a cover band, a band that you're in that plays local clubs and venues. Do you need to learn Pro Tools? No, that's the myth of the industry standard. That's what I'm hoping to get across to you today is industry standard only matters and only applies if you're really in the industry. If you're going to be a playback tech, we talk about Ableton Live on this podcast and that's the main focus, but let me challenge you for a bit. Even on that, if you're going to be a playback tech and go travel the country doing playback, you need to know Ableton. You have to know Ableton. It's very much the industry standard. But I have friends like my friend Mike McKnight that he's a digital performer guy, right? And I think at a time, digital performer very much was the industry standard. So if you're a playback guy, do you need an Ableton? I think you do. And again, some people get offended when I say guy. Playback guy, I mean guy, girl, whatever your thing is. Someone who does playback. Right. So do you have to know Ableton? I think you should, but you could also know digital performer. But again, let's say you're doing playback for your church. You're not out on the road traveling. You have no aspirations of running tracks for someone else other than yourself. Do you need to learn Ableton? Do you need to learn digital performer? No. You could use Prime, you could use Playback and call it a day, right? That's what I mean by industry standard only matters if you're in the industry, okay? Now, let me get to my second point here, which this rings home for me, and I'll tell a little bit of my story. Consider becoming an expert at one thing. Let's apply it to software, because this is where I'm going to apply it to my life. Consider becoming an expert at one software. Now, is it beneficial to know Pro Tools, to know Logic, to know MainStage, to know Ableton? Yes, that's incredibly, incredibly beneficial. If you are going to be a playback tech, what we say, point one, if you're going to be in the industry, yes, you should know Ableton. It's the industry standard that does exist. But I want to challenge you and encourage you to consider becoming an expert at one software. Right. So for me, I'll get people reach out quite often and say, hey, I'm using MainStage for keys. Can you help me? And I go, nope. And it's not because I don't like MainStage. I mean, sure, I don't love MainStage, but I can't help them because I'm not an expert at MainStage. I have used it in the past. I, at a fundamental level, know how to connect it to Ableton. We'll talk more about software that isn't your main thing in a second, and how you can know that a little better, and some important things there. But if you try to schedule a lesson with me on how to use MainStage, I'm probably going to cancel the lesson, or I will cancel the lesson, or I'll kindly say, hey, I don't think I'm the right person for this, because I committed a long time ago to become an expert at Ableton Live, to focus on one thing. And I found, with my personality, I would much rather become an expert at Ableton Live than kind of fragment my knowledge across Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, MainStage. Now, does that mean that someone who is really good at all of those doesn't know Ableton as well as I do? Well, not necessarily. I have a lot of friends that produce songs in Logic and then run them live on stage in Ableton, and they know both softwares pretty well. I know friends that record songs in Pro Tools, and then they take and run those songs on stage in Ableton Live. They know both softwares pretty well, right? But for me, I realized a long time ago, if I can focus all my efforts, all my energy on, I'm going to use Ableton Live for recording songs. I'm going to use Ableton Live for mixing podcasts. I'm going to use Ableton Live for running tracks, for sound design, for editing audio. I'm going to do everything I need to do related to audio in Ableton Live. And by doing that, I become an expert. Right. Now, I'm not going to get a gig. I'm not going to get a job. I have no desire to get a job. Well, to get a job, one, but two, to get a job being a recording engineer, being a mix engineer, because if I walk into a studio and sit behind Pro Tools, I'm going to go, so preferences, where do I go for preferences? Now I know where to go for preferences for Pro Tools, but if I need to add an audio track, I'm going to go through the 16 different confirmations and prompts that Pro Tools forces me to do to add an audio track. I'm going to struggle a little bit because I know Ableton. I'm an expert in Ableton, but I don't feel a need right now at this moment in my life to try to learn Pro Tools, because I'm not in the industry that uses Pro Tools, right? I'm not becoming a mix engineer, not becoming a recording engineer. So I don't need to focus on that. Now, is it going to hurt me to focus on that? No. Particularly as someone who knows Ableton really, really well. It's weird to say an Ableton expert, but I'm an expert in Ableton Live. I don't know everything about Ableton Live. I'm not an expert on Max for Live. I'm not an expert on performing on stage as a DJ with Ableton Live. I've done it once or twice, and it ain't pretty. It's very much, it ain't pretty, but I've done it. I'm not an expert at that, but I am an expert at Ableton Live and understanding how it works. Now, third thing here though, let's talk about MainStage. I have worked with folks that said, hey, we're using Ableton for tracks, but we want to use Ableton, MainStage for key stuff. How do we send program changes from Ableton into MainStage? Well, I'm able to figure that out because I'm able to apply my expertise to other DAWs at a basic level. Let's apply this to recording. I have used, despite what I like and my preferences, I have used Pro Tools to record before. It was a small little demo thing, a studio in Florida when I lived in Florida and worked at a church there in Florida. And I had to use Pro Tools to capture some audio stuff. And you and I figured out how to do it. And I figured out how to do it fairly quickly. I'm not an expert at it. I'm not going to teach a video. I'm not going to teach a course on it. But I figured out how to do it. And the reason I was able to do that, I was able to apply my expertise at Ableton to another DAW at a basic level. I've always felt it's super important, and this is something we tried to structure when I worked at Ocean's Edge School of Worship in Florida and teaching students. I thought it was super important for students to learn basics of recording, capturing really good audio, but staying focused in Ableton Live. And the reason why I said Ableton is because they had to use Ableton on stage for tracks. That was part of the thing. And I said, let's remove the requirement for them to learn Pro Tools, and let's have them focus on one DAW and go deep on one DAW, but learn the basics of recording. Because then if you get the basics of recording, if you learn how to mic a guitar amp well and capture it well and gain structure well into Ableton Live, you can then take that knowledge and really easily transfer that over to Pro Tools. Yes, you're learning a different interface. You're learning I would say, more complex and convoluted interface, but you're learning a different interface, and you're able to apply the skills you learned in Ableton in how to just capture audio well to apply over in Pro Tools. So again, I think for me, it goes back to becoming an expert at one thing is super important. Learning the basics of stuff, applying it in a DAW or in one kind of field, one area, and then you can apply that everywhere else. Even for me, the past two and a half years of my life, I was a broadcast video director at my church. I'm not a video guy. I do live streaming. I capture video stuff here. I've edited video before, but I'm not a video guy. But I was able to take my basic knowledge of signal flow, and I understand signal flow well from audio and from creating a connected stage experience for bands and myself with MIDI, with time code, that I said, I can understand signal flow. I can understand how to connect the SDI cable to a video hub, to then patch into an ATEM, to then patch out to an encoder, to then send to the web, right? I can figure that out because I had this basic skill set, this basic knowledge. I was an expert in one area that I was then able to apply that to a kind of different domain of knowledge, which is live streaming. So to recap, do you need to know Pro Tools? I keep picking on Pro Tools and Mainstage. They're good softwares, right? And they're good softwares to each your own. But do you need to know Pro Tools to run tracks in Ableton Live? No, not at all. If you need to export stems out of Pro Tools, it's probably worth learning how to do that to use alongside of Ableton Live. But again, to recap here, the industry standard only matters if you're in the industry. If you're going to become a recording engineer, mix engineer, you've got to know the software, the techniques, the tools that they use to do that. I want to challenge you. I want to encourage you, consider becoming an expert at one thing, one software. Devote yourself to learning Logic through and through, Pro Tools through and through, Ableton through and through. In fact, find the software that resonates most with you. For me, it's not just me, poking fun at Pro Tools or Mainstage. Ableton just resonates with me. The way I think, the way I operate, is the way that Ableton is kind of designed and created. When I sit behind Logic or Pro Tools or Mainstage, things just feel different. The interface feels different. The steps I have to take are a little different. So consider becoming an expert at one thing, and then finally apply that expertise that you have again to other DAWs at a basic level. Become good at recording, and you'll be able to learn really quickly how to record in any DAW. Become good at recording Ableton Live, you'll be able to quickly learn how to become good at recording in Pro Tools or Logic. To wrap up this week, if you are someone, again, we talked about becoming an expert. If you're someone who wants to become an expert at running tracks in Ableton Live, first, you got to have the right tools. You got to have the resources to do that. And I've put together a bunch of really great free resources for running tracks in Ableton Live that you can get access to for free by heading to FromStudioToStage.com/free. I've got free click tracks, free guide cues, free time code files, a free track template for Ableton Live 11 that you can download, you can start using right now that will help you become an expert at running tracks in Ableton Live. So again, to find that, head to FromStudioToStage.com/free. Included a link in the show notes as well where you can get that content. And if you enjoyed this podcast, do me a favor, hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so you're notified when I post a new video. New episodes of Behind the Spacebar go live every Monday at 10 a.m. Central. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, then do me a favor. Give me a thumbs up, give me a rating or a review if you enjoy the podcast. It means a lot. And then the final thing I've been asking folks to do for a little bit now is grab your phone and text this to someone that you think would enjoy this podcast. If you know someone that you think would enjoy this content, please send it to them. It would mean the world to me. And again, thanks so much for your support. I'll end the episode the same way I started. Thanks for your support. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you on the next one next week. And make sure to stick around tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central, when I post new content every single day, 7 days a week. Take care, everybody. Bye.